It's time to mind your business with me, Jamila Lodge. Tune in to find out how to mind your business with BEDC, special guest entrepreneurs, industry experts, and more. Brought to you by BEDC. Bermuda Business starts here. So welcome to Mind Your Business. I'm your host, Jamila Lodge, and I'm here with both of you. We have Janice Gutteridge, Director and Head of Corporate of Cox Hallett Wilkins. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Jenny Farrer, Manager and Head of COSUN Corporate Services Limited.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm excited to have you guys here. We're going to talk a little bit about our partnership and how it's going to benefit small businesses. So let's get right into it. Can you give us a little background on Cox Hallett Wilkinson and your role within the firm? And I'll start with you.
Sure. Cox Hallett Wilkinson is a small to mid-sized legal firm. It came about through the merger of Hallett Whitney and Patton, which was set up about 1917.
Okay.
And Cox and Wilkinson, which was set up around 1969. They merged together in 1997, and we were over at Milner House, and now we're over at Cumberland House. And we are a full-service law firm, so we do corporate and commercial, we do litigation and dispute resolution, private clients, property, and intellectual property.
Okay.
And we also have an affiliated trust company, State House Trust Company, and COSUN Corporate Services, which is our corporate services provider. And I will turn it over to Jenny to give a little bit of background on COSUN.
Yes, so I'm the head of COSUN Corporate Services, and we are a licensed corporate service provider, and we're regulated by the BMA. And as Janice said, we're an affiliate to Cox Hallett and work very closely with the lawyers there.
Okay, wonderful. So can you talk a little bit about what you do at the firm and how that department supports local businesses in Bermuda?
Yeah, sure. Do you want me to
You go
take
first.
that one? Okay, fine. So corporate services, really what we do is we support the company all the way through its life. So it would be incorporated by CHW, but then after that, if the books are handed to us, then we would look after the statutory records, we'd support them with directors' changes. If they bring in investment, then we would support with updating statutory registers for shareholders.
Okay.
And then we deal with all of the annual regulatory filings that relate to a company, or it may be an LLC or a partnership, depending on the corporate structure that the business has taken.
So let's talk a little bit about the requirements, right? And so businesses can start a business. Most of our clientele are like sole proprietors. But when it comes to actually establishing themselves as a limited liability company or a LLC, can you talk about what the requirements are and as it relates to those services that you just mentioned, Janice?
Sure. So if you're interested in setting up a entity, there are a number of different routes you can take. You can do the limited liability company by shares, the LLC. You could do a partnership. You could be a sole proprietor. If you're wanting to form an entity, the first thing you do is to contact Dante and Eureka, and then they'll refer you over to my team, which is myself and Eve Mantle.
Okay.
We'll provide various memos and information setting out the different structures and what are the pros and the cons, the costs, various things. Depending on your personal preference, which one you choose, there are a number of forms to be completed. Everybody has to supply passports and utility bills so we can get the consent of the Bermuda Monetary Authority to conduct business in Bermuda. And then we would register the entity with the Registrar of Companies.
Okay.
At the end of that, we'll have either the Certificate of Formation or the Certificate of Incorporation. And that's when we start to organize the company with the appointment of directors, allocation of shares, or the allocation of membership interest and appointment of managers, depending on how you go.
Okay.
Once those are signed and in order, that's when we would transfer, if you selected COSUN to provide the corporate services. Every company has to have a registered office, which is a street address. It can be a residential address. It can be a business address. That's where your minute book with your share register, your D&O register, your financial statements, your beneficial ownership register have to be kept.
Okay.
And
At the registered address.
At the registered office.
Okay.
And those records are, various parts of those records are open for inspection.
Okay.
Either by the Registrar of Companies team if they want to come in and have a look, or by shareholders or other directors. So that's the importance of having a registered office. And beyond that, if there's ever an instance where somebody needs to serve legal documents on you, they serve them at the registered office.
Okay.
So that's where Jenny's team comes in.
Yes.
And then they take over the day-to-day admin. So they'll help organize board minutes. They can help certify documents for banking, for various purposes, payroll tax, for instance.
Right.
And so they just help with the administration of.
And
of
it's a
the company.
requirement, right? You have to have like a registered administrator. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so you don't have to have an administrator.
Yeah, you have to have a secretary.
You need to
Right.
have a
Somebody
secretary.
has to be
Yes.
appointed. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And to me, I'm thinking, well, it's probably a lot of work, a lot of things that sometimes are required by law to maintain, which is why you have to have the secretary. And that will be the benefit of having cosign,
Yeah,
right?
and that's what we found recently, is that with all the increased regulation, whether that is due to compliance or PIPA, which is the Personal Privacy
Yeah,
Act
it's
that's
coming.
coming into effect,
That's right.
or anti-money laundering purposes, there's just increased regulation that and more is coming in. So traditionally, where local clients often kept their own books at their house because they had to hold an annual general meeting,
Right.
and that was easy to do, we found that a lot of those older clients who only came to us for the legal work were struggling to keep up with deadlines for the regulatory filings, and they needed to come to us and get their books brought into compliance.
Right.
Which then we had to charge as the law firm, not the corporate service provider. So we, in doing that remedial work, that was what inspired us to look at our relationship with the BEDC, and if we could put together a tiered discount for those fees, perhaps that would be helpful to the startups.
Right.
Because although we know, cost effectiveness, you need value for every dollar that you're putting into the business.
That's correct.
But if you're having to stop a year or two in and bring everything up to date because you didn't know this came in on
Right.
a certain date, then
It costs more money,
Yes.
right, to be able to
Yes.
do that.
Yeah, and
So-
there are penalty
Yeah.
fees as well. There can be for some of the regulatory filings. There are penalty fees, or there's time taken because you haven't completed the process properly. You can end up having to liaise with the registrar, and it can be more time consuming than if you got it kind of right in the first place. So the idea is to provide that support right from the beginning.
Right from the beginning. And you
And-
don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah, and the tiered aspect of the discount was that in year one you're facing a lot of high risk where every dollar is precious.
Mm-hmm.
So, we give a quite severe discount on that one. But then as you move into year 2, 3, 4,
It goes up.
presumably
Yeah, you can handle.
you can handle more expense.
Yes.
So that's
Yeah.
reflected in the discount.
So let's go back and just remind people. So we established a partnership in 2017, which was originally around a discount on incorporating the business. So you're a sole proprietor and you decided you want to make this a limited liability company. You can come to CHW and you would offer a discount. So talk a little bit about the difference between what we started in 2017 and where we are today.
Sure. So it actually started off when a member of the BEDC approached one of our former corporate associates about sponsoring Rocket Pitch.
Yes.
And as one of the sponsorship prizes, we gave discounted legal services, which I think was $500 for the winner, discounted off your incorporation services. And that eventually evolved into the discount for any BEDC referred clients. And we've had about 30 or so clients referred over the years, 25 of which have proceeded
Okay.
with actually forming an entity for their businesses. So it's been, a great opportunity for us to meet these people at the ground level, and what we would, our goal is to support them from day one until they either move on and sell out or
grow up.
Yes.
You know.
So
Exactly.
for local business especially, the relationship between the firm and the client
Yes.
is so key, because you need to know who to call, or the fact that if you call me or Jenny and it's not quite what our specialty is, we still know who to get you to in
Right.
the firm.
Because you have a broad, I guess, a menu
Yes.
of services that you can offer, which is good to know. So, in terms of the incorporation, now there's the added value of now being able to take advantage of the corporate administration services, which, like you said, is offered on a tiered pricing. Can we talk a little bit more about that to try and help them understand how it works?
Yeah, definitely. So we really realised that obviously we'd done all the work on the incorporation, so there's a bit of a gap in the market for startups in terms of like having that ongoing support. So we looked at it's a 4-year structure.
Okay.
In the first year of so it will usually be the incorporation year, COSOL actually discounts its fees by 68%.
Oh wow!
So getting more than 50% discount, and we work very much on a fixed fee basis. We don't like to give surprises to clients. We know that works for everyone in terms for budgeting. So generally, what we'll do is we'll issue our fee invoice, and then that will be
What
the
it will
fees for
be.
the year.
Okay.
It's billed in advance, so you kind of know this is my fee, and now I've got COSON to help me. So during the course of the year, we're going to pick up with our clients, whether it's on a regulatory update. So, for example, this year we've seen the introduction of a corporate regulatory fee, which is an additional fee that's been layered on top. So we knew that was coming, so we actually invoiced our clients right at the beginning. We took the money in, and we're now preparing to pay over by the end of the 31st of October.
Okay.
So we're kind of keeping on top of regulatory developments for them. It's all part of the fee, and alongside that, we'll make sure annual government fee is paid. And then they can pick up the phone. I've got an investor coming in, and I want to talk to someone about, issuing some shares to them. Then obviously that would be a collaboration.
Or I'm
perhaps
doing a
between-
bank financing.
or a bank
Right.
financing.
Or I'm opening a new bank account.
Yeah, so we deal with bank account opening as part of that fee.
Okay.
We'll support with providing all the compliance documentation, and often because we already have a good relationship with a very close relationship with the bank, we'll just take over and then we'll refer back to the client when we need something. But you can kind of shift a lot of that work onto COSON, and then we'll come back and say if we need something.
And then once you have your bank account, we find, every 3 to 6 months we're getting requests from the bank to update
Yes.
the KYC. So that takes that off
The
off the
business
entrepreneur,
owner,
yeah,
yes.
So
yeah.
we'll deal with that. For
Yeah.
them.
So there's also a time saving cost, so you can more effectively budget your time to what really matters, which is the management of the business.
Correct. And I think the idea of providing that fixed cost, because sometimes that's the issue of the unknown. You don't know what it's going to be, especially for startups, right? Where every dollar counts.
Yeah.
So knowing in advance what that's going to be and what they're working with, I would imagine would be great.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's a difference between, yes, I'm going to hire for legal services, and no, I can't afford it, right?
Exactly.
So talk to me a little bit about why, or no, let's talk about when. When do you think an entrepreneur or business owner should consider incorporating their company?
So that answer will vary depending on the nature of the business that you are launching, right? So you have to look at the risk. So if you're launching a purely online business where you're going to be dealing with credit card sales, you probably want to incorporate before you launch, because that gives you, if you're incorporated, it gives you a deeper degree of protection against liability in the event of credit card fraud. If you are going to be launching a food restaurant or food preparation, again, there's a level of risk there because, you are serving food and beverages to clients and there's, if somebody
Has an allergy,
Yes.
they get sick,
Yes.
right?
right? So there's a high level of risk there. If you're starting a plant nursery or, something like that where it's a lower level of risk, you may want to launch the business, and earn some revenue until you have enough to afford looking at coming in.
Right.
So you have to be conscious of that. What is my business services that I'm offering?
Mm-hmm.
What is the level of risk that I'm taking on? And then that will help guide you in addition to, can I afford to do this now?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and for a lot of sole proprietors, it's that point at which they've been operating as a sole proprietor and their business has expanded, and they're thinking, well, I'm going to take on an extra employee, or perhaps they're going to bring in another family member or an investment. It's those times when you start to expand, and especially if you're employing people.
Yeah.
That's a really good time to look at incorporating.
Or
in terms
also
of
if you're taking
liability.
on investors, because
Exactly.
investors want something tangible that they get in return for the investment.
Exactly.
So they want shares or a membership interest or something
Yeah.
to reflect their investment in the business.
And I always say to people when I say, okay, you're creating this business entity, which can live separate from yourself, right? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think sole proprietors, their business, it's like their baby. So it's like one and the same. It's synonymous with themselves. And so I try and say that when you incorporate the business, you're creating a bit of separation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So if you form a business entity, an LLC, or a company limited by shares, you are essentially creating a separate legal individual. It operates in its own name. It can enter into contracts in its name. It can have own assets. It can incur debts in its own name, separate from you as the individual. So if there is ever an issue and you get a claim made against the business, it is not made against Jamila.
Right.
So your house, your personal bank accounts, your personal assets are outside of the scope of what can be used to pay that claim. Right? So they can only go after the business assets. So whatever's in the company's bank account, if it owns property, for instance, like the Cooper's building,
Right,
they
right.
own that building,
Right.
sort of thing. And so we call that ring fencing the assets
Okay.
of the company, so that a creditor can only take or make a claim against the assets that are within that circle.
Which is, I would imagine, comforting, right? Especially like you said, if you're assessing the risk and you're in a really risky industry, like you're a medical professional or something like that, where you're actually administering things that could potentially cause harm or whatever the case may be, then I would think that it would make sense to go ahead and create that separation, because you don't want to lose everything because maybe the business didn't work. So I think it's great that that service is being offered. Now, what is your process? So if a sole proprietor, comes to you with their business idea, kind of take me through the process of what they would be going through, or the conversations you would have to try and assess whether the timing for incorporation is right for them.
Sure. So on the incorporation side, we would have the client either on a telephone call or Teams meeting or an in-person meeting, and they would meet with myself and Eve. And really in that initial meeting, what we're doing is listening, right? So we would like you to come in and tell us about the nature of the business that you're going to be doing. When are you thinking of launching? We might ask questions to try to get a handle on what the risk profile is for that business. And then we would talk to you about options for your structures. Do you prefer the company limited by shares? Do you prefer the LLC? If you're looking at a partnership,
Right.
is everything understood? And we give you like a client memo setting out the process for how that entity is formed. We give you a minimum fee table so that you understand what the costs should be. And then we will give you usually a questionnaire, which goes into the sort of nitty-gritty detail about registered office, who are your managers or directors going to be, who are your shareholders, what's your authorized share capital going to be, and we'll say, go take this, look at it, have a think.
Mm-hmm.
Once you've had a chance to process it, highlight any questions you have, and then we'll come back and we'll go through the forms with you,
Okay.
and then we'll help you fill them out. And that's where we talk about things like nobody knows what their authorized capital should be, right?
Right.
Back before 2000, back before 2006, we had a minimum share capital requirement of 12,000. So
Right.
that was easy. Everybody knew you had to have a minimum of 12,000.
Yeah.
But now you no longer have that. So, should it be 10,000? Should it be 100? Should it be 1,000? And a lot of that will depend on, are you looking to bring in future investors?
Right.
Because if you're looking at bringing in future investors, then you want your authorized to be higher than what you plan to issue to yourself.
Right.
So that you have shares to spare if an investor comes in.
Got you.
So we talk about, things like that
Mm-hmm.
and what they're comfortable with and what we recommend, and we come to an agreement and that. And then once they've filled in our questionnaire and given us all their compliance information, we'll look at like timing of the year. So for instance, if you incorporate after September 1st, you pay a prorated annual government fee.
Okay. So you don't
Right.
have to pay the full
Yes.
amount because the year's almost over.
Right.
That's
So
a
if
good
you're
time.
coming in
Yeah.
and talking to us in August, we might say, we recommend you wait until after September 1st
Okay.
because you get advantage of the discounted.
Fee.
Yes.
Right. On top of the fact that you get the discount for BEDC, being a BEDC registered business. Yeah. Okay. That's awesome. So now, from your perspective, Jenny, how do you support? So when they had gone through this incorporation, they've incorporated, they have the choice. They can either go with COSAN or go with another organization.
Or themselves.
Yeah. And so the benefit of choosing COSAN in this scenario would be what?
Well, obviously the discounted fees in the first year,
Right.
and the second year we still discount to 45% in the second year as well. So we want to encourage those businesses to come to us, and we grow with them as they get bigger. So really, when you first incorporated, usually the first thing you need to do is get your bank account set up. So the filling out of the forms, sending all the compliance information, and getting it set up can be quite time consuming. So we can support with that process. It's going to take that off your desk when you're trying to
you
get
can
your
start
business,
do the business
get
and
the
let
business
you
going exactly, and we can help to expedite that with the bank. So that's one side of it, and then obviously wherever we are in the annual cycle, we're just going to make sure that we're sending reminders, we're keeping them up to date. We're making sure the annual government fee gets paid in time with no penalties. And if there are changes, say I don't know, that maybe the business does amazing in 12 months and they want to bring in some new directors, you just give us a call. We're just going to update the books.
And I think one of the advantages
done properly.
not to overlook is with a smaller boutique firm, it's the relationship. It's the client relationship with the administrator, right? So that if you do have a question, you can just pick up the phone and call or send a quick email.
Right.
Whereas some of the larger companies, maybe you don't know who your administrator is, right? Or maybe there's constant turnover, so they're always changing. And a smaller firm has a little bit less of that.
Yeah.
So the relationship can be a little bit stronger.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do have really close relationships. We like to keep close to our clients and keep that communication. And we're a close-knit team as well. So we've just recently brought on a new assistant corporate manager we're really excited about, Rhonda Duran, who's got 40 years of experience here in Bermuda. If she doesn't know it, I don't think it's worth
it's not knowing. Out there, right?
And the great thing, I think the real thing, and I've worked for a consultant myself, and there is that tendency, I think, when you are a sole proprietor to try and you do every dollar counts.
You do everything.
But what does happen is you can lose a lot of trying to become an expert in something that's not easy to. We are the experts, and because we charge a fixed fee retainer, they can just call. You can call us. You're not going to get an invoice.
Right.
You're not going to pay an additional bill. If there's something big going on for the company, and we need to speak to CHL, we'd always let you know.
Okay.
We'll never ever send an invoice without somebody knowing in advance that an estimate's been provided. So they can have that surety that they can phone us and just ask a question, and whatever we can do, whenever we can help, or we can refer. We've obviously got loads of partnerships across the island, accountants that we work with, or we know the government employees well, and we can hook people up with other partners. So always give us a call.
Yeah,
we can help.
I really do appreciate that, and I appreciate you guys being willing to come on board and address this, because that is important, especially for small businesses, because we want them to grow, right? But sometimes, because they're like the chief everything officer, they're trying to do all the things, and time is money, right? Like you mentioned earlier in the conversation, if you miss a filing, or if you don't do, now you have fees for not having done that. So it just makes sense to, let's start off, right. And to avoid those penalties, because the money that you're spending in penalties, you could have just gone ahead and paid to have the services provided for you, so that you know that everything is the way it needs to be, especially in the event of like an expansion, or you're looking for shareholders or investors and that sort of thing. So I really do appreciate the fact that you guys expanded the offering to include those services, because I do think that sometimes as a startup or as a entrepreneur, you try to do it all, but really that's not what you're good at, right? You're doing it because it's required, but you may not do it right because you don't have that expertise. So that you guys have the years of expertise, and you figured out a way to make it affordable for the small business owner, I think is really, really great. And I'm excited about the opportunity for them, because they can now take advantage of this added value, right? This added service that they didn't typically have. So one of the other things that I wanted to talk to you about was the difference between a company limited by shares. So there's LTD, right?
Yeah.
And LLC. And I think sometimes people get confused about when and why and what's the difference. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So the difference is really how and where they were developed, right?
Okay.
So an LTD is a company limited by shares, and that is the traditional English style company that developed where investors who were interested in supporting a business, they invested in the company and they got a piece of paper, which was a share certificate, to say you now get 10% or 15% of the company, and that is in return for your investment, right? And it was a very formal process. So you have to have your board meetings, you have to have your shareholder meetings. And so you'll see, if you're reading, the business section of the paper, Bank of Butterfield, Argus, any of those entities, every year that they're advertising their annual general meeting.
Okay.
So that is the meeting where any shareholder can attend, and they vote on the election of the directors, the election of the auditor, various statutory requirements, right? And then the directors, who are the day-to-day management of team of the business, they will meet to discuss sort of specific business, and make a decision on how to manage the entity. An LLC developed in the United States, and it's a hybrid of a partnership and a company.
Okay.
So it sought to take the best aspects of the partnership, which was the flexibility and the ability to do things by agreement in line with the LLC agreement, of the partnership agreement over there, and the protections of a company.
Okay.
Right? So it became an entity that gave you limited liability, but it didn't have the formality.
Gotcha.
I always say the bylaws of a company are like the rule book, right? The handbook. If you want to know how to transfer shares, how to appoint a new director, how to call a meeting, you go to your bylaws. Those are your rules. An LLC doesn't really have a rule book. It has a policy book,
Okay.
which is the agreement. It tells you how to issue a new membership agreement, but it has a caveat, as agreed by the members.
Okay.
Right? So it has
So that's
more
where the flexibility comes in. Okay. Okay. And I think if I'm thinking about who our stakeholders are, and they're relatively small when they're getting started, I would imagine that they would appreciate having that flexibility, whereas before they didn't have it.
It's 50-50. Some of it is familiarity.
Yeah.
And like who are you targeting your possible stakeholders to be?
Mm-hmm.
Are they going to be more comfortable with the traditional company or with the LLC?
Right.
Right? Because especially some of the older generation, they still want that share certificate.
Because that's what they're used to,
Yes.
right? Yeah. So, believe it or not, we're like, it's been 30 minutes. Doesn't feel like it, does it? But before we wrap up, I just want to give you an opportunity to say, how can entrepreneurs or business owners make the most out of this opportunity? What would you say?
I think the key is not to be afraid to come and ask questions. Even if you're not quite sure that you're ready to pull the trigger, if you get the information is always key, right?
Yeah.
So if you're doing the entrepreneurship classes, normally we do present
yes.
on formations and incorporations anyway. So you can always pull aside our presenter after one of those sessions or send a follow-up email. We do the initial consultation for like half an hour without fee. So you can always come and ask questions, and just getting comfortable and feeling like you're understanding the pros and cons of each setup, each type of entity, and what are you comfortable with.
Right.
That's the key.
Okay. Now, you did mention early in the conversation that you've had about 25 of our stakeholders take advantage of it. What has been kind of their feedback? Like, what have you heard the most that said, okay, we're on to something, we need to continue to support them?
I mean, it's a fine line because we're bound by some confidentiality.
Of course.
But, we've had some that we've definitely seen have very sort of rapid success in sort of the first 18 months. And we see that because they come back to us. They come back to us because they've either won the BEDC loan financing or, they've gotten an investor, or they're getting bank financing because they're looking to expand. That is sort of, to us, how we judge what they're doing, because once we've incorporated the company as the lawyer,
right,
I don't really get the day-to-day communication with them, and nor should I. But, if you run into the street, they often stop and give us a little update. But for Jenny's team, because they're more in constant communication, they get a little bit better sense of that.
Okay. Yeah. And I would imagine it would help if it's in-house like that, because you can have those conversations to make it easy, the transfer of information easier.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Where we do act as corporate service provider and we see those businesses growing, they know that we're their trusted advisor. They can just call us and contact us if something comes up, and it's so easy Janice and I work so closely together. Our offices are next door. We can just have a quick conversation.
And based on her conversations, that's where we sort of look at whether there are additional services that
they may need.
So, for instance, if they're saying, okay, I've got this incorporated, we're doing well, I need to register my trademarks. Well, hello, we have a trademark registration administrator.
Yeah.
Right? So, I know one of the questions on the spec sheet was, how could we expand the partnership? But it's really getting a sense of what the startups need.
Exactly.
What services are they looking for, so that, we have a better sense rather than just jumping in and trying to, because that doesn't help anyone.
No, it doesn't. And I think this makes sense, right? You recognize that there was a gap. Like, once it's incorporated, then now comes all of the things that come along with incorporation. Like, you have to register, you have to pay those fees, and you have to do it on time, so that you were able to recognize that and then provide this additional offering to fill that gap. I guess the same follows suit for all the other services that CHW provides. If you see a need in the future, then you do have the opportunity to create pricing for those startups and entrepreneurs. So I really do appreciate it. We appreciate the partnership because our goal is to support small businesses and the expansion of small business. And we understand that you're going to need legal services. You're going to need that support at some point, so that you guys were able to come on board and partner with us in this way, first starting with Rocket Pitch and now offering a discount on your services to these entrepreneurs. We're extremely grateful for that. So we definitely are encouraging people to reach out. Of course, we will continue to refer as necessary. But I just want to thank both of you. Thank you, Janice. Thank you, Jenny, for coming on and minding a little bit of your business with us today. Any last words before we wrap up?
I think, yeah, just remember that it's coming into that time of the year where you get the discount on your incorporation fees. So I think if you're listening to this and it's making you think, well, maybe I need to have a conversation, come and speak to us and, explore it.
Yeah.
I think it's a good time to get a good discount, isn't it? And we'd be delighted to hear from anyone.
Wonderful.
Yeah, just for us, CHW has always tried to support the local business community, whether that is through the provision of legal services or corporate services. So, yeah, just give us a call. We'd love to have a chat with you and see if and how we're able to assist.
Love that. Well, thank you again, ladies. And remember, if you don't mind your business, who will? Thanks for tuning in to Mind Your Business with me, your host, Jamila Lodge. Tune in next week, Thursday at 4 p.m. because if you don't mind your business, who will? Mind Your Business is brought to you by BEDC. Bermuda Business starts here.